Zara had always considered herself a seasoned diplomat. She'd worked for years as a translator, facilitating communication between the myriad species that visited the human colony of Solaro 5. The planet was situated on the edge of human-controlled space, a stopover point for trade routes that connected the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Its alien population was diverse and vast. Some species were peaceful, others less so. Zara had learned to navigate these negotiations with finesse, finding common ground even in the most difficult conversations. But nothing had prepared her for this. The morning had begun like any other. Zara sat at her desk in the government offices of Solara 5, typing out the final sections of her report on the most recent peace talks between humans and the Zergoth, a reptilian species known for their sharp claws and colder-than-ice personalities. As she reviewed her notes, a small bell on her console rang, signaling an incoming message. She sighed. Another meeting, another delegation, more bureaucratic nonsense. She glanced at the clock. It was just after mid-morning. Her shift would be ending soon, but not before this final meeting. With a groan, Zara pushed away from her desk and straightened her shirt. She'd been asked to join a diplomatic meeting with a new species, one she'd never heard of before, called the Varrock. The briefing said they were a militaristic race, warriors through and through, and their presence on Solara 5 was not just for trade, but for negotiations about a possible alliance in the defense of a nearby sector. Varrock. Zara's pulse quickened. The Varrock weren't just some peaceful traders. They were serious. They had the kind of presence that could shift the balance of power in the sector. She arrived at the meeting room with minutes to spare. The space was vast, designed to accommodate various species of all sizes, and arranged with enough seating to make anyone feel like they were being honored. Still, Zara felt a little out of place. She was just a human, and from the looks of it, the Varrock delegation was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. The doors slid open with a faint hiss. She blinked as she entered, immediately greeted by a large, imposing figure. Towering nearly 7 feet tall, the being before her had lavender-colored skin that glimmered in the light. It wore sleek silver armor, and though its face was partially obscured by a helmet, Zara could tell it was beautiful. Sharp features, glowing eyes, and an overall aura of power and grace. As she approached, Zara's heart skipped a beat. This was the warrior she was supposed to meet? Zara wasn't afraid of much, but she couldn't deny that the sheer force of this being's presence was enough to make her feel small. Still, she straightened her back, put on her best diplomatic smile, and approached cautiously. "Welcome," Zara began. "I'm Zara, your translator for today's talks. It's an honor to meet you." The warrior's piercing eyes locked onto hers, studying her for a moment that stretched just a little too long. Then, without a word, it turned its head slightly to acknowledge her and gave a nod. Zara felt a chill in the air, though whether it was her nerves or the alien's presence she couldn't tell. "I am Qatar," the alien said in a voice that was low, smooth, and commanding. "I am here to discuss the terms of our alliance." The voice was rich, filled with authority, and yet something about it sent a shiver down Zara's spine. She couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Qatar seemed to command the space, every movement exuding confidence. Zara cleared her throat, trying to shake off the overwhelming feeling of intimidation. "Of course, Qatar. We've prepared for this meeting and hope to come to a mutual agreement." Before the negotiations could begin, Zara opened the datapad and started translating the first of many documents. But as she worked, her attention kept drifting back to Qatar. The warrior was standing off to the side, observing the rest of the room, its stance one of perfect poise and power. Zara couldn't help herself. Her eyes wandered to the alien's sheer size and intimidating beauty, and as strange as it was, she felt an inexplicable sense of fascination. It was then that Zara, in an attempt to lighten the tension in the room, blurted out a comment she didn't even think twice about. "You know," she said, chuckling lightly to herself, "you're Cute. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. She froze, immediately regretting her choice of words. Qatar, who had been gazing at the room with an air of indifference, suddenly turned its head sharply in her direction. There was a long pause as the alien's eyes locked with hers, a mixture of confusion and something deeper flashing in its gaze. "What did you say?" Qatar's voice was colder now, its tone sharp. Zara felt her face flush with heat, realizing just how badly she'd misjudged the situation. I didn't mean, I meant," she stammered, her mind racing. I meant to say that you're striking, stunning even, like impressive. I didn't mean cute, like that." Cathar stared at her, their expression unreadable. For a moment, Zara wondered if she had said something that could cost her everything. There was a strange tension in the air, and her words seemed to hang heavy between them, causing the room to feel unnervingly quiet. Qatar didn't respond for a long time. Finally it spoke, but the words were slow, almost measured, as if it were trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Cute," Qatar repeated. The alien's voice was distant, and Zara could tell from the tone that it wasn't familiar with the concept at all. "This word you speak, what does it mean?" Zara's mouth went dry. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how far off track this conversation had gone. "Well, cute is a human term," she began slowly, feeling the need to clarify. "It's something we say when we find something charming or endearing. It's not necessarily about strength or power, but—" "What?" Kantar's posture seemed to stiffen. "You called me cute? And yet I stand here as a warrior, as one of the fiercest beings in the galaxy? Why would you insult me so?" Zara's heart sank. She could see now that Qatar wasn't just confused, the alien was genuinely affronted. She was in danger of losing control of the entire diplomatic meeting if she didn't fix this immediately. "I swear to you I didn't mean it that way," she pleaded, scrambling to recover. "It's just an expression. Where I come from, we use it for things that are, well, not necessarily small, but charming. Like when someone is unexpectedly graceful or beautiful in an unassuming way. It's not meant as an insult at all." Qatar remained silent, considering her words. Zara could tell that the alien was trying to process the concept, but it clearly wasn't used to hearing such compliments in this form. The Varek were a warrior species, their lives built on combat, honor, and respect. To them, calling someone cute likely meant something entirely different, if not offensive. Zara continued to stammer, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know your culture didn't use that word in a positive way. Where I'm from, it's just a compliment, like saying you're beautiful or striking in a way that's not intimidating." Qatar's gaze softened, though the warrior's stance remained strong. The alien seemed to be processing her explanation, slowly coming to terms with the misunderstanding. "I see," Qatar said finally, lowering its gaze just slightly. "Your words are foreign to me, but I understand now that you meant no offense. Still, this term, cute, has no place among the warriors of my people. Strength is the mark of respect. That is how we show admiration." Zara nodded fervently. "I completely understand. I'll never use the term again around you, I promise. It's just, well, it's something that's ingrained in our language, and sometimes it slips out." For a long time, the two of them stood in silence. Then Qatar spoke again, their voice softer than before. "Perhaps I have much to learn about humans," the alien said thoughtfully. "Your ways of communication, they are strange, yet fascinating." Zara smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. The tension in the room had lessened, and Qatar no longer seemed angry, just curious. There was something about that curiosity that softened Zara's nerves. "I'd be happy to explain more," she said, her voice calmer now. "Language can be tricky, but once you understand the context, it makes sense." And with that, the meeting continued, the ice between them slowly beginning to melt. What had started as a catastrophic mistake was turning into something else. an opportunity to explore the depths of interspecies communication. Zara wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to forget Qatar anytime soon. This is a detailed expansion of Chapter 1, fleshing out Zara and Qathar's initial encounter and laying the groundwork for their developing relationship. Let me know if you'd like to continue or refine further. Zara had spent the next few hours in an uncomfortable silence as she walked through the halls of the Solera 5 colony, her mind replaying the strange, awkward conversation with Qatar. After the initial shock of the cute incident, the alien warrior had been quieter, almost contemplative. Zara had expected the worst, an alien who'd take offense and never trust her again, but instead, Qatar had seemed curious. Curiosity, Zara thought, was something she could work with. She had taken Qatar to the food hall for the next part of the negotiations. The warrior had insisted on accompanying her, despite the fact that the meeting had officially concluded. Zara wasn't sure if this was a cultural thing, a gesture of politeness, or something else, but she decided to play along. Walking through the wide, bustling dining area, Zara pointed out the various foods on display, all brightly colored and exotic-looking. There were mushrooms from the subterranean farms of Exafia 7, spiced meats from the Novarians, and brightly glowing fruit from a nearby moon. Zara tried to put on her most welcoming face, but Qatar's imposing presence seemed to overshadow everything. The warrior moved with an air of grace, but also an undeniable weight, like a storm waiting to pass. "So, what do you usually eat back on your planet?" Zara asked, trying to sound casual as she glanced at the menu in front of her. Qatar regarded her with a cool gaze, unblinking. "We consume primarily protein-based sustenance. It fuels our bodies for the rigorous demands of our lifestyle." Zara chuckled nervously, glancing at the food. "So, you don't eat any fruits or vegetables?" "Only in rare cases. They are unnecessary for strength," Qatar responded, a touch of pride in their voice. "Fruits and such are not valued by my people." Zara nodded, intrigued. She had learned about the dietary habits of various species during her time on Solera 5, but hearing it directly from Qatar added a new layer of understanding. The Varric were clearly a species of warriors, not given to indulgences like the ones the humans enjoyed. It made sense that they would prize efficiency over it. Zara hesitated for a moment before continuing. "So, no sweets, no cakes or pies? We've got some really good desserts here." Qatar tilted its head slightly, the motion so subtle that it could have easily been missed by someone less observant. "Dessert?" the warrior asked, clearly not familiar with the concept. "Explain it." Zara stopped walking, staring at Qatar for a moment. "Dessert is... well, it's the part of the meal that comes last. It's often something sweet, something rich, that's meant to be a reward after the main meal." She smiled softly, thinking about her favorite chocolate cake back home. "It's not about nourishment, it's about enjoyment. A treat, if you will." "Interesting." Qatar seemed to consider this for a long moment, then continued walking. "I will try it. Show me." Zara blinked in surprise. "Wait, really? You'll try dessert?" Zara's smile faltered. "Still thinking about that, huh?" "Yes," Qatar said seriously. "I do not understand why you would use such a word to describe me. Do I seem weak to you?" Zara blinked in surprise, taken aback by the question. She had thought they had moved past this. "No, Qatar, not at all. The word cute doesn't imply weakness. It's more of a compliment. Like I told you before, it's just not about strength, really. It's about finding something unexpectedly appealing or endearing." Qatar's brow furrowed slightly. "The Indian?" The alien seemed to try the word out on its tongue. "Explain more." Zara took a deep breath and tried to simplify things. "Okay, imagine this. You're a warrior, right? You've seen battle, fought countless enemies, your strength is undeniable. But maybe there's something else about you. Something that, when others see it, they feel affection. like a softness beneath the surface. Endearing is when you show that side of you to someone and they want to protect it or cherish it. There was a long pause as Qatar considered this, the warrior's glowing eyes fixed on her, and Zara wasn't sure if she was reading too much into the look, but she felt that Qatar was truly trying to understand. "I think I understand," Qatar said slowly. "You are saying that strength and tenderness can coexist? That a warrior can be both feared and admired in different ways?" Zara smiled. "Exactly." Qatar's gaze softened, and for the first time Zara felt that she was looking into the eyes of the warrior, not just the armor. "I see now why you used the term cute. It is not weakness, but a different form of strength." Zara nodded, her heart lifting. "Yes, exactly." They stood in silence for a few moments, the tension from earlier lifting like a cloud being pushed away by the wind. There was an odd comfort in the stillness between them now, as if they had both crossed some invisible bridge. As they finished their pastries in companionable silence, Zara realized something. Despite all the cultural differences, despite the strange misunderstandings, there was a connection beginning to form between her and Qatar. It wasn't just about words or even diplomacy anymore. It was about two beings trying to understand each other's worlds, both intrigued and open to what they could learn. Zara glanced up at Qatar. "You know, I think this is the start of something interesting." Qatar turned to her, the warrior's expression unreadable but softened by the faintest hint of something she could only interpret as curiosity. "I agree. Perhaps this partnership, this alliance, will be more than just about strategy." Zara smiled. "Yeah, maybe it will be something more." This expanded Chapter 2 takes Zara and Qatar deeper into their understanding of each other's cultures, with Zara trying to explain the concept of cute and Qatar beginning to grasp the complexities of human emotions. They're starting to form a bond, not just professionally, but personally as well. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with more, or if you want to adjust any details. Zara woke up to the sound of the colony's morning bell echoing across the quiet rooms of her apartment. She stretched slowly, feeling the weight of the night in her bones. It had been a long day of navigating alien cultures and miscommunications with Qatar. She couldn't help but smile at the thought. Despite the awkwardness, despite the cultural clashes, something about the warrior intrigued her in a way she hadn't expected. The day before had ended on a tentative note of mutual understanding, an agreement of sorts. Qatar had accepted Zara's explanation about the word cute, but there was still an underlying tension between them. As much as Zara had tried to explain, she knew there were layers of misunderstanding between their species that went far beyond a single word. But something had shifted. She got dressed, pulled on her standard uniform, and quickly reviewed the schedule for the day. She had a meeting with Qatar later, another diplomatic session, though she wasn't sure if it would be strictly formal or if their previous exchange would color the next conversation. Either way, Zara was prepared for whatever might come. She had grown accustomed to working with different species, but this time it felt different. As she walked through the corridors of the Solera 5 administrative building, she couldn't help but feel the slight buzz of anticipation in the air. She'd never thought she'd form a connection with someone like Qatar, someone so alien both in the literal sense and in terms of their culture. But now, that connection was beginning to take shape in ways she hadn't expected. Maybe it was the shared curiosity, the sense of learning from one another. Maybe it was just the sheer complexity of trying to understand each other's worlds. She arrived at the meeting room early, as usual. Zara was always punctual, something drilled into her as a diplomat. She entered the large space, a circular table at the center, surrounded by communication equipment and large viewing screens. It wasn't long before Qatar arrived, their towering figure filling the doorway. The warrior entered silently, standing tall in their sleek silver armor. Zara noticed the faint hum of their presence, the subtle power that seemed to radiate from them. "Good morning, Qatar," Zara said, offering a friendly smile. "How are you today?" Qatar's helmeted head tilted slightly, as if evaluating her response. After a long moment, the warrior's voice resonated through the room, a calm, almost detached tone. "I am well. I have been reflecting on our last conversation." Zara's smile faltered a bit, unsure of what Qatar meant by that. "Oh? About the word cute, right?" she asked, trying to keep things light. "Not just the word," Qatar replied, stepping closer to the table, "but the concept, your language, your way of thinking." The warrior paused, as if considering something deeply. "You speak of strength and tenderness in the same breath. It is confusing." Zara leaned against the table, trying to ease into the conversation. "It's not as complicated as it seems, I promise. I think you're starting to understand that people can be both strong and kind at the same time. You've got to see that in a person to really get it." Qatar's glowing eyes seemed to lock onto her, an intense focus in their gaze that made Zara feel exposed, as though Qatar was searching her for the truth of what she was saying. "Perhaps," Qatar murmured. "It is a difficult concept to grasp. On my world, strength is paramount. It is all that matters. But your people, you seem to give importance to other things I do not understand." Zara shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't back down. "We value strength too, but not just physical strength. Emotional strength, kindness, compassion. Those things matter just as much as battle prowess. Without those things, we don't build meaningful connections. We don't—" She paused, realizing she was getting too far into a personal explanation. She wasn't sure how Qatar would respond to something as vulnerable as that. But Qatar didn't seem to be disturbed. I see. And this is why you call me cute, because you believe that beneath my strength there is something else to be appreciated?" The question was curious, not defensive, but there was a hint of uncertainty in Qatar's voice, a soft tremor of doubt Zara hadn't heard before. Zara nodded, choosing her words carefully. "Yes. And no. I think you're someone who carries strength with grace. It's appealing in a way that's hard to describe. You seem to have so much power, but you don't always use it. That's why I said cute. It's like a compliment. But I know now that it might not be the best word in your culture." There was a long pause as Qatar absorbed her words, their glowing eyes flickering in the soft light of the room. After a while, Qatar stepped closer to her, their movement deliberate, measured. Zara instinctively stepped back, but she didn't feel threatened, only intrigued. "You misunderstand," Qatar said softly, almost as if speaking to themselves. "I am learning, but your words still puzzle me. In the heat of battle, in the presence of the enemy, there is only strength. There is no room for tenderness, no room for vulnerability." Zara took a deep breath, unsure of how to respond. But before she could speak, Qatar continued, voice steady. "Do you believe that I am weak?" Qatar asked, the words sharp though not angry. Zara's eyes widened and she quickly shook her head. No, not at all. I think you're one of the strongest beings I've ever met. But strength isn't just about physical power. You have to have emotional strength too, and maybe that's something I'm trying to show you." For a moment, it was as though the air between them thickened. a silence settling that felt almost intimate. Qatar studied her for a long time before speaking again, this time with a gentleness Zara hadn't expected. "I have seen your people, Zara. I have seen how they live, how they form bonds, and how they treat one another with tenderness. It is foreign to me, but not entirely unwelcome." Zara blinked, taken aback by the softness in Qatar's voice. The warrior was admitting something vulnerable, something that clearly went against everything Qatar had been taught in their warrior culture. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" Zara said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "We can be strong, even with tenderness. It's not a contradiction, Qatar. It's just a different way of being. We don't have to choose between the two." Qatar remained silent for a moment, then slowly nodded, as if agreeing or at least coming to terms with the idea. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps there is more to this than I have understood." Zara smiled, relieved that Qatar wasn't dismissing her. "You'll see. It'll take time, but you'll get it. I believe in you." The words hung between them for a moment, and then Qatar turned, stepping toward the window that overlooked the colony's horizon. The warrior stood still, watching the distant landscape, but Zara noticed a change in the atmosphere. An openness, a willingness to learn that hadn't been there before. "I want to understand more about your ways," Qatar said, their voice low but steady. "I want to see this tenderness you speak of." Zara's heart gave a strange lurch in her chest. Qatar wasn't just learning about human culture. They were asking to be a part of it. Zara walked over to Qatar, placing a hand gently on the warrior's arm, a tentative gesture, unsure but filled with hope. "We can start small. Maybe we could walk around the colony later, talk to some people, see what they do when they're not fighting wars or building spaceships." Qatar turned slightly to meet her eyes, their gaze softer now. "I would like that." And in that moment, Zara realized something that had been building ever since their first meeting. She wasn't just learning about Qatar's species, she was starting to understand something deeper, something more profound. She was beginning to understand Qatar, the individual, the warrior, the enigma, the person. And in doing so, she was discovering a part of herself too, a part of her own strength, and the kind of tenderness that had always been there but was now just beginning to bloom. As the silence lingered between them, Zara couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. They were on the cusp of something monumental, and this discovery, whatever it turned out to be, was only the beginning.